I had been a metal fabrication worker for 8 steady, uneventful years. Nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous, nothing that ever made me question whether I would make it home after a shift. That was true until the week our new supervisor, Rebecca, arrived. From the moment she walked in, the atmosphere changed, but nothing prepared me for the message she sent me that morning. She ordered me to operate crane number 3, the one every worker avoided because its brakes were shot and it hadn't passed safety inspection in months. I told her it wasn't safe, expecting any normal supervisor to understand. Instead, she replied with a line that made my stomach drop and my hands go cold. "I don't care if you get hurt, just get it done." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a reckless order. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Rebecca didn't just send that one reckless message and leave it there. She doubled down on it the moment I hesitated, as if safety was nothing more than an inconvenience to her. She walked across the shop floor with that clipped, impatient stride of hers, stopping right in front of me to repeat the order out loud. Her voice was sharp, curt, and filled with annoyance that I dared question her. She pointed at crane number 3 like it was perfectly fine, even though the red, out of service, tag was still hanging from the control box. Everyone in the shop knew that crane was a nightmare waiting to happen. The braking system had failed during a test run 3 weeks earlier, and maintenance had flagged it as unsafe until the replacement parts arrived. The tag was signed by our previous supervisor, and it was supposed to stay untouched until the inspection team cleared it. Rebecca didn't seem to care. She said deadlines mattered more than excuses. She said the client wouldn't wait. She said that if we didn't finish the load transfer that day, corporate would come down hard on all of us. But it was the tone she used that made my skin crawl. It wasn't frustration. It was entitlement. Like she believed every worker there was replaceable, expendable, disposable. I calmly told her the same thing I wrote in my message. The crane wasn't safe to use. Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned in just close enough for me to smell the bitterness in her breath as she whispered that she didn't care. She wanted the job done, even if someone got hurt. Especially if it meant she looked good in her first week on the job. That's when I realized I needed to protect myself. I pulled out my phone, pretending to check the time, and instead opened the camera. I took photos of the out-of-service tag, the frayed control cable, the warning markers on the floor. I screenshotted her messages. I even recorded a short video of her walking away after repeating the order, her voice faint in the background but still clear enough to catch the words, "Just run it anyway." My hands shook slightly as I saved everything to a hidden folder. Not because I was scared of her, but because I had never imagined needing evidence against my own supervisor. A few coworkers approached me quietly afterward. They had overheard pieces of the conversation and asked if she was really trying to make me use that crane. When I said yes, their expressions shifted from concern to resignation, like this was exactly the kind of thing they expected from her. One guy, Lewis, told me she had pressured him the day before to overload a forklift just to clear the bay faster. Another said she dismissed a chemical spill as minor, even though it required breathing masks. It became obvious that her behavior wasn't a one-time lapse. It was a pattern. Reckless. Aggressive. Dangerous. That night, after my shift ended, I gathered all the documentation I had collected and wrote a detailed account of what happened. My heart pounded as I filled out the OSHA complaint form. This wasn't something I ever thought I would do. But I knew that if I stayed silent, someone was going to get seriously hurt. Maybe even killed. And if Rebecca didn't care about that, then it was up to someone else to force her to care. I hit submit and sat there in my truck for a long moment, staring at the confirmation email. It felt like the first quiet breath I had taken all day. But I also knew this was only the beginning. 2 days later, the shop floor felt strangely tense the moment I walked in. People were talking in low voices, glancing toward the entrance every few seconds. I didn't think much of it until the heavy glass doors swung open and two men and a woman in dark OSHA jackets stepped inside. They didn't smile. They didn't greet anyone. They walked straight past the front desk and into the production area like they already knew exactly where they were going. That's when my stomach tightened. OSHA had arrived, and they weren't here for a routine visit. The lead inspector raised his badge, his voice loud enough to cut through the noise of the machines as he announced that the entire crane area was officially shut down. He ordered all operations halted. He taped off the work zone with bright yellow barrier lines, the kind usually reserved for accident sites. Rebecca came rushing out of her office, heels pounding against the concrete, a confused and irritated look on her face. She tried to greet them with a forced smile, but the inspectors barely acknowledged her. They went straight to crane number 3 and began examining it from top to bottom. One inspector pointed at the worn-out brake housing. Another photographed the control panel, zooming in on the warning lights that had been on for months. The third read the red tag aloud, emphasizing the words, "Do not operate, failed safety check." Rebecca's smile fell apart. Her face went pale. She tried to explain that the crane had been cleared for temporary use, but the inspectors shut her down immediately. They said the maintenance logs had been altered. They said someone had tried to bypass protocol by signing off on repairs that never happened. They said this wasn't negligence. It was deliberate. The entire shop went silent. Employees who had been avoiding eye contact suddenly stepped forward. One after another, workers began telling the inspectors about everything Rebecca had forced them to ignore. Lewis explained how she pressured him to overload a forklift. Jenna described being told to work without proper gloves near sharp metal edges. Another worker admitted Rebecca had threatened to cut his overtime if he reported a machine that kept sparking. It was like a dam breaking. Months of fear, frustration, and danger all pouring out at once. I stood off to the side, watching as OSHA filled notebook after notebook, took photo after photo, and recorded every detail with cold, unshakable precision. They weren't just gathering information. They were building a case. Eventually, one of the inspectors approached me privately. He asked if I was the worker who submitted the complaint. My heart thudded in my chest, but I nodded. He told me I had done the right thing. He said my documentation was thorough, clear, and exactly what they needed to understand the scope of what was happening here. He also warned me to stay alert. In cases like this, he said, supervisors often panicked and tried to target the employee who reported them. I didn't know then how true that would turn out to be. By noon, OSHA had seized records, interviewed half the shop, and ordered a temporary halt to several machines, not just the crane. Rebecca's face grew tighter and more desperate each time an inspector called her over. By the end of the day, she wasn't walking, she was packing. Back and forth. Back and forth. Her hands shaking. Her phone buzzing nonstop. Everyone could feel the shift in the air. This wasn't a routine inspection anymore. This was an explosion. And Rebecca was standing right at the center of it. Once the OSHA inspectors left for the day, Rebecca's calm facade completely disappeared. She gathered the staff into the break room for a meeting that immediately felt like a trap. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on each person as if daring them to speak out. She began talking about responsibility and teamwork, but her words were hollow and sharp, dripping with blame. It quickly became obvious that she was trying to shift all the fault onto the employees. She said that anyone who reported unsafe practices was overreacting and undermining the team. Her tone became louder, harsher, more personal. She singled me out by name, accusing me of exaggerating problems to make her look bad. When I stayed silent, she leaned closer and threatened me directly, her voice low but venomous. She said that if anything on the floor went wrong, it would be on my conscience. Later that evening, she tried to take matters into her own hands. She came to my workstation while I was clearing my tools. She reached for my phone, trying to grab it from my hand, claiming she needed to check for evidence against her. I pulled back, keeping my distance, and she stormed off, slamming the door behind her. But the threats didn't end there. My phone started buzzing continuously. Text messages, emails, even instant messages on our internal chat system. You'll regret this. Hope OSHA enjoys your lies. You think anyone will believe you. She sent them one after another, a relentless tide of intimidation designed to scare me into silence. I ignored them and saved each one, knowing they were further proof of her misconduct. Her behavior escalated over the next few days. She began contacting colleagues I had worked with in other departments, spreading false rumors about my integrity and professionalism. She even went outside the factory after hours, holding signs in front of the gates accusing me of destroying her career. The situation began to affect everyone around her. Other employees were nervous, unsure of how to react, but no one spoke up. Rebecca was trying to create an environment of fear and chaos, hoping it would make me back down. She believed that by attacking me personally, she could undermine my credibility and erase all evidence of her wrongdoing. But it didn't work. Each attempt she made only strengthened the resolve of those who had already witnessed her reckless behavior. The documentation I had submitted to OSHA, combined with testimony from other employees, painted a clear picture. Her threats and intimidation could not hide the facts. Her strategy to shift blame and silence witnesses was falling apart. Even as she continued sending messages through the night, I felt a sense of clarity. She had underestimated the seriousness of the situation. She had underestimated how much evidence could speak for itself. And she had underestimated the resolve of someone who refused to compromise safety. By the end of that week, it was clear that her panic was growing. The more she tried to control the narrative, the more obvious it became that she had lost control completely. Every action she took to save herself only confirmed the dangers she had created, and every threat she sent was now a record of her recklessness. She had set herself on a path that could not be reversed, and there was no turning back. After weeks of investigation, OSHA finally released their findings, and the results were staggering. The report detailed multiple deliberate violations of safety protocols, with Rebecca at the center of nearly every incident. The first violation cited was the intentional exposure of employees to dangerous conditions, which carried a fine of $70,000. It wasn't just an oversight. OSHA labeled it a willful disregard for human life. Next, they documented falsified maintenance records and inspections for several machines, including crane number 3. The company had tried to make it appear that repairs had been completed when they had not. This led to 2 separate fines, $42,000 each, for fraudulent record-keeping. Beyond these, a series of smaller infractions accumulated to nearly $487,000 in penalties. The total financial impact was massive, but the human factor weighed even more heavily. The report highlighted the phrase Rebecca had sent me, "I don't care if you get hurt, just get it done." OSHA classified this statement as evidence of a serious, deliberate, and exceptionally dangerous violation. It wasn't just about the money. The company was placed under mandatory periodic inspections for 3 consecutive years. Rebecca herself was terminated immediately after the report was published. The findings were thorough, nomming her personally in multiple infractions and making it clear she bore ultimate responsibility. Employees across the shop were relieved to see the company held accountable, but the process had been tense, draining, and frightening. Many workers had feared retaliation, yet the documentation, photos, videos, and witness statements left no room for dismissal or doubt. The OSHA report also emphasized the systemic failure within the management structure that allowed such behavior to persist. It called for a complete overhaul of safety protocols and retraining of supervisory staff. Company executives, facing a public and legal reckoning, had no choice but to comply fully. For me, the confirmation from OSHA validated every action I had taken. It showed that speaking up, documenting evidence, and refusing unsafe orders had a tangible impact. The agency's transparency in sharing the violations sent a strong message across the industry. No longer could supervisors act recklessly without consequences. The report circulated widely within the company and beyond, reaching trade publications and industry newsletters. Rebecca's reputation was irreparably damaged. She became a cautionary tale for anyone considering bypassing safety rules for short-term gains. The penalties, both financial and reputational, underscored the seriousness of deliberate safety violations. For the first time, the weight of accountability was clear, and the culture within the company began to shift. Employees who had been fearful of speaking up felt empowered, knowing that OSHA and proper documentation could protect them. The company began implementing immediate safety improvements, replacing outdated equipment, and reinforcing mandatory reporting procedures. It was a turning point, showing that adherence to safety protocols wasn't optional. The fines, inspections, and public scrutiny sent a clear message. Reckless management decisions have real consequences. Rebecca's downfall served as a stark reminder that no one is above accountability. And for those of us on the shop floor, it was proof that standing up for what is right, even in the face of intimidation, can lead to meaningful change. After her termination, Rebecca didn't accept what had happened. She was furious, desperate, and completely unhinged. Within hours, she began sending emails to everyone in the company, claiming that I had fabricated the complaint to ruin her career. She accused me of dishonesty, manipulation, and exaggeration, painting herself as the victim. Her messages were aggressive, filled with anger, and clearly intended to intimidate anyone who might side with me. Next, she took her campaign online. Rebecca posted multiple times on LinkedIn, writing long posts that misrepresented the situation and tried to shift blame onto me. She tagged colleagues, industry contacts, and even former supervisors, spreading a narrative that I had somehow orchestrated her firing. Her posts went viral among her network, generating discussions that were both negative and misleading. Then she escalated further. She began messaging people I knew personally, sending texts and social media messages to friends, family, and professional connections. She attempted to smear my reputation outside of work, claiming I was unreliable, vindictive, and untrustworthy. One morning, I learned she had been standing outside the factory gates, holding a sign that read, "Wrongfully terminated." Employees passing by would see her, and some even took photos that she tried to circulate online. It seemed like every effort she made was intended to create chaos and fear, to make me doubt myself and question my decision to report her. But despite her relentless attacks, the truth remained intact. The OSHA report was public, detailed, and irrefutable. Every photograph, every documented violation, and every testimony she had tried to suppress was now in the open. Social media, instead of helping her, became the tool that highlighted her failures. People began sharing the OSHA findings widely, comparing them against her claims. The contrast was stark. Her credibility was collapsing in real time. Her attempts to vilify me only drew more attention to the facts she wanted to hide. Even those she reached out to directly recognize the evidence and refused to support her version of events. Within days, it became clear that no amount of posts, emails, or intimidation could change the outcome. Her professional network began to distance themselves. Former colleagues ignored her messages. Industry contacts stopped responding. Her online presence, once polished and professional, now looked desperate and vindictive. Rebecca had built a narrative of victimhood, but it backfired completely. Every lie she told was countered by public records, witness statements, and OSHA documentation. She had lost control entirely. Every move she made to regain influence only deepened the perception of her instability. Even outside the factory, her actions were fruitless. No one was buying her version of events. She had created a storm, but it had circled back on her. The more she fought, the more obvious it became that her career in the industry was over. What started as attempts to intimidate and mislead turned into a public record of her recklessness and dishonesty. Every effort she made to recover control highlighted how completely she had lost it. By the end of the week, it was undeniable. Rebecca's attempts at manipulation and retaliation had failed utterly. Her professional reputation lay in ruins, and nothing she did could undo the evidence of her misconduct. Rebecca's downfall didn't stop at losing her job. Within a few weeks, law enforcement opened a formal investigation into her actions. The charge was reckless endangerment, directly tied to her insistence that employees operate unsafe machinery. She was required to appear in court, and the evidence against her was overwhelming. The OSHA reports, employee testimonies, and the documented messages she had sent were all presented as part of the case. The court wasted no time reviewing the evidence. It was clear that her actions were deliberate, not accidental, and had placed multiple lives at serious risk. She was sentenced to 100 hours of community service and 2 years of probation. The ruling also included mandatory reporting to authorities if she attempted to work in a supervisory capacity again. Not long after, she tried to sue me personally for defamation, claiming that my OSHA complaint had ruined her career. The case lasted only 15 minutes in court. The judge dismissed it outright, citing the overwhelming proof of her own misconduct. Her reputation within the industry was effectively destroyed. No company wanted to hire someone with such a documented history of ignoring safety and threatening employees. She struggled to find work and eventually had to take a job in retail, earning a fraction of her previous salary. Legal fees piled up, draining her savings and forcing her to sell her home. Even her personal life suffered. Her ex-husband used the OSHA reports during a custody dispute, leveraging her reckless behavior as evidence that she was unfit to make decisions for their children. Her friends and former colleagues distanced themselves. Social media continued to circulate the OSHA findings, ensuring that her actions remained public knowledge. Every attempt she made to rebuild her life in the industry was blocked by the fact that her name was now permanently associated with reckless and dangerous behavior. She had become a warning example for the entire sector. Young professionals were told about her case during training sessions, emphasizing the consequences of disregarding safety regulations. Her downfall was a direct result of her own choices. She had prioritized deadlines and appearances over human life. She had attempted to intimidate, threaten, and manipulate those around her instead of accepting responsibility. And now, she faced the cumulative consequences of every reckless decision. From legal penalties to financial ruin to personal embarrassment, there was no aspect of her life that hadn't been affected. Meanwhile, the employees she tried to intimidate moved on with their careers. The company implemented new safety protocols and upgraded equipment. The culture changed entirely, emphasizing accountability, transparency, and employee well-being. For me, it was a confirmation that standing up for what is right, documenting the truth, and refusing to compromise safety could make a tangible difference. Rebecca's story ended not with redemption or recovery, but with a complete collapse of her career, her finances, and her reputation. It was a stark reminder that recklessness and dishonesty have consequences that reach far beyond a single incident. No short-term gain could outweigh the long-term fallout of risking lives and violating trust. Her choices led her to a life she never imagined, stripped of professional opportunities and personal stability. The industry remembered, the law enforced, and the lesson was clear. Ignoring safety and threatening others comes at a price that can never be undone. After everything unfolded, the company began to change in ways we had never seen before. Safety protocols were reinforced, equipment was upgraded, and managers were retrained to prioritize the well-being of employees. The culture shifted from fear and pressure to accountability and transparency. For me, the outcome was deeply reassuring. I received a well-deserved raise and was able to continue my work without the constant threat of reckless supervision. Colleagues who had once been hesitant to speak up now felt empowered to report unsafe practices immediately. The incident became a turning point, showing that documenting evidence and standing firm could protect lives and force meaningful change. Looking back, I realized that if Rebecca had simply waited 48 hours for the crane to be properly repaired, none of the chaos, fines, or personal destruction would have occurred. Her impatience and reckless ambition destroyed her career and caused years of hardship for herself. The lesson is clear. Always record and preserve evidence when asked to do something dangerous. It can save lives, careers, and prevent irreversible damage. Speaking up may feel risky, but in the end, it is the right choice. By refusing to compromise safety, we not only protect ourselves, but also ensure the workplace becomes safer for everyone.